Weather University, sponsored by Gaston Roofing.
Welcome into Pinpoint Weather University. I am meteorologist Brant Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. We're talking about the peak of hurricane season on this episode of Pinpoint Weather University. The peak of hurricane season has been relatively quiet so far this year. Last September, we had 6 named storms within the span of 2.5 weeks in the Atlantic Basin. One of those storms being historic Hurricane Helene, which obviously caused major devastation for our friends in the Western Carolinas. This September, we have no named storms yet, but that's likely going to be changing here soon. We're recording this on September 16th on a Tuesday, and I do think that we're going to be seeing some more named storms later in the week here. So that's likely going to change, but still, it has been a relatively quiet start to the peak of hurricane season, and the peak of hurricane season is just that, the peak of hurricane season when we expect more activity during the season. But just because we're pretty quiet now doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. And here joining me on the conversation today is Dr. Matthew Easton, UNC Charlotte Professor of Meteorology. Dr. Easton, thanks for coming on the show with us today.
Happy to join you.
So, Dr. Easton, it's the peak of hurricane season. We have seen storms so far this year. We've knocked out Andrea, Barry, Chantal, Dexter, Aaron, and Fernand so far. Gabrielle will be the next storm. Again, as we record this on Tuesday, September 16th, we're likely going to see Gabrielle here soon. But we haven't seen a lot of activity for the peak of hurricane season. What's the big reasons for that, and why do we have the peak of hurricane season around this time of year anyway?
Yeah, so kind of starting off with why we have the peak around the early kind of mid-September, it really just comes down to the ingredients that are required to kind of develop a hurricane. They all come together at this time. So definitely the number one thing is you need to have warm ocean waters. And so the ocean gradually warms. And we all know that kind of like the peak in the solar heating is back in June. But the ocean waters keep warming up, and they really reach their peak kind of late August into September timeframe. And so that's an important factor. Then we also have the systems that develop into hurricanes are called easterly waves, and they come off of Africa, and they work their way westward across the Atlantic. And those systems tend to be most intense in late August and early September, as well as you've got dry air or moist air that are factors, as well as the vertical shear. And so those things all come together, and it's basically at this time of year is when they're all favorable for hurricane development.
And then,
so
and I was going to say,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and looking at this year, I was looking at just kind of some statistics about September, just how we haven't seen a whole lot of activity. Last year we had 6 named storms. It was a very active September, about 2.5 weeks of just 6 storms developing in the Atlantic Basin. No storms so far as of September 16th here in September. What's the big reasons for the lack of activity this year for the peak of hurricane season?
Yeah, so there's really 2 things that are coming into play. The first one is the waves that are coming off of Africa are quite a bit weaker than they have been, particularly last year. And so since they're weaker, they basically can get torn apart by vertical shear, and the dry air that kind of comes with them from the Saharan desert can basically evaporate them away. The other important thing is that the Bermuda High has been much more intense this year. So here in the Charlotte area, we experienced the Bermuda High with basically very hot weather and very dry weather, which we've kind of had most of September here. And the strength of that Bermuda High, since it's stronger, it's actually pushing these waves further south when they come off of Africa. And so typically what we need is those waves to come off in what is called the main development region, which is between 10 degrees of latitude and 20 degrees of latitude in the Atlantic Basin. And when the Bermuda High is really strong, it pushes them south of 10 degrees down toward the equator. And we know that hurricanes are cyclones that rotate. The air in them rotates. And so we need systems to be off of the equator, north of the equator, for that rotation to occur. If they're too close to the equator, then that rotation won't occur. So we basically have been having systems move too far south and too weak. And so we haven't had any development yet. But hopefully that'll change.
And do you expect that to change? I know the peak of hurricane season has been quiet. You mentioned the big reasons why. Do you think we'll see the activity pick up again soon?
I definitely think so. The Bermuda high is actually starting to weaken. It's normally supposed to weaken at this time of year, and so you can actually see the waves that come off of Africa are staying further north. The waves are also stronger. The ones that have come off in the last week definitely are just holding together, and I wouldn't be surprised that we have some development here in the next few days.
And when it comes down to hurricane season as a whole, we see a lot of these waves coming off the coast of Africa. Is there any way around this time of year that we could see more homegrown storms, like those storms that form around the Caribbean and also around the Gulf as well?
We can occasionally see those, but most of those kind of more homegrown storms occur when a front might move off of the coast, and we're kind of in that time of the year where the cold fronts that move through might cool it down a slight amount, but not a lot, and so they're not very strong fronts. And so when they get south of us, or maybe kind of stall over the Gulf Stream or down in the Gulf of Mexico, they don't have a lot of energy with them. And so they are kind of really good at developing at this time of year. But once we get into October and November, then we can get some more intense cold fronts, some stronger systems, and there's a greater likelihood that those might develop into kind of some late season hurricanes.
And with us seeing more tropical waves now at this time, I have the hurricane lead time graphic here that we have built here in the Pinpoint Weather Center. We have that graphic showing when the waves are coming off the coast of Africa. We're talking about 8+ days until it could have a potential impact on the U.S. But some more of those homegrown storms that you were talking about with fronts and the Caribbean, the Gulf, a little bit less lead time when it comes down to those storms. With those tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa and being so far out, how hard is it for models to really look long range and see if those storms could be an impact for the U.S. or any other land?
Yeah, it's a challenge for the weather models to really make long-term forecasts, mainly because they come off of Africa where there's a decent amount of weather observations. But once they enter the Atlantic, it's largely a data void region because the models rely on surface weather observations, weather balloons that are sent up, as well as radar. But all three of those are missing in the middle of the Atlantic. Uh, there are satellite observations, which are helpful, but you really need the combination of multiple observing systems to get the information. So it's a little bit of a data void. And as the waves then work their way over toward the Caribbean, that's where those first kind of weather balloons come from with the islands. And then, in fairness, you can also get the Hurricane Hunter aircraft that can make it into it at that point too. The aircraft can't fly all the way across the Atlantic.
And how important when these storms get a little bit further west in the Atlantic, more so towards the central Atlantic and towards the U.S., how important is it to have those hurricane hunters that you just mentioned as well when they go in the storm? How well does that help the models?
It is critical. It's absolutely important because the satellites can only give us so much information, and a lot of times the satellites might indicate that the storm is maybe on the weak side, but once the aircraft get in there, they can literally measure the winds right there in the center of the storm and get a good estimate for how strong it is, and if there are some structural features, like there's things called concentric eye walls, where there might be multiple eye walls. You can't always see those with a satellite because of the cloud cover on top, but the aircraft can see it, and those are important for estimating the intensity of the storm and any evolutions that the storm might undergo.
And I wanted to go back to the Saharan dust as well. You were mentioning that just a few questions ago, talking about how Saharan dust can play a role. For those that don't understand Saharan dust or what that means, where does that come from, and what exactly does that do to these tropical systems?
Yeah, so the Saharan dust, it's probably better described really as Saharan sand. Obviously, the Saharan desert is just it's a massive desert, and there's lots of large sand dunes. And when the weather blows through, you can get that sand getting picked up and carried along by the winds. The kind of more visual things that are very, I guess, people remember are the big sandstorms you might see on TV. But even a small amount of sand can get picked up and carried along by the winds out over the Atlantic. And then, so not only is that dry air because it came off of a desert, but that those sand particles can actually kind of suppress the development of thunderstorms by heating up the middle levels of the atmosphere and kind of capping the atmosphere, so no deep storms can develop. And so that is a kind of a critical factor that actually limits hurricane activity in the Atlantic basin. And sometimes those dust clouds can travel all the way across the Atlantic, and you can actually get dust fall, is what they refer to it as, in the islands and even in South Florida. They will have a dust or sand that falls on the area.
And Dr. Easton, look at the peak of hurricane season. Things are pretty tame for now. You mentioned that activities likely going to pick back up again as we get more so into the season here. So we shouldn't let our guard down.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of the season left. A lot of times people think of kind of like the main part of the hurricane season is really from kind of mid-August into, say, mid-October. We often describe it as the peak as being September 10th, but there's really kind of a 2-month window when most of the activity is occurring. So we've still got a solid month remaining of a good chance of some significant activity. And then, of course, the season itself runs to the end of November. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have, 3 or 4 more storms at least, if not more. So definitely don't let your guard down. Pay attention to local and national news, and be prepared.
All right, Dr. Easton, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today. UNC Charlotte professor of meteorology there. Thanks so much for coming on the show with us and bringing some insight when it comes down to the peak of hurricane season and what could be expected later in the season, my friend.
Absolutely happy to help.
All right, we'll be right back here on Pinpoint Weather University. Got some more to talk about on the other side of the break. Please keep it with us here on Queen City News Plus. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University here on Queen City News Plus. I am meteorologist Brandon Lawson. If you're just watching this last segment, you heard from Dr. Matthew Easton, UNC Charlotte professor of meteorology. And I forgot to put it in there. He was actually my former professor there at UNC Charlotte. Dr. Matthew Easton is great. He taught me a lot about tropical meteorology. I had tropical meteorology with him. I also had a class called Advanced Synoptic Meteorology, looking into fronts, low pressure, all kinds of different things that go into the synoptic meteorology aspect. He taught me a lot of things with that, and also instrumentation. Teaching me about some of the instruments that go into not only forecasting meteorology, but looking at some of the current observations. That's how we get some of our data in regards to weather. So Dr. Matthew Easton, it was great to have him on the show with us today. Not only telling us about why we have the peak of hurricane season around this time of year, but why hurricane season isn't necessarily showing its peak this hurricane season so far. So it was great having him on, and obviously we can't let our guard down for hurricane season. Hurricane season heating back up, but we're also going to be heating up here locally in regards to our temperatures. I want to show you some latest data from the Climate Prediction Center. This is looking at the temperature outlook from September 22nd to September 26th. And you look at the United States there, everything is orange, red. Yeah, that's the sign that we've got some warmer than normal temperatures on the way as we go into late September. So that's a sign that we're likely going to be seeing some above average temperatures, not only here in the Carolinas, but across much of the U.S. And that could possibly mean more 90-degree days are in our future. Now, we can see 90-degree days around this time of year. 90-degree high temperatures. How late can we see them in Charlotte? So the earliest last 90-degree day we have ever seen on record was back in 1917 on August 2nd. So August 2nd is the earliest last 90-degree day we have seen. Now, the average last 90-degree day that we typically see here in Charlotte is September 12th. So we're already past that. We're already past the average of when we see our last 90-degree day. But the latest 90-degree day we have ever seen on record was October 13th in 1954. So it can happen. We can get some late October 90-degree days. And I want to kind of go back here a second. I'm looking at that latest October 90-degree high. So October 13th, 1954, we saw a 90-plus degree high temperature day in Charlotte. And when you look at snow, we've actually seen snow on Halloween before in Charlotte. So just think 2 weeks later, not this particular year, but 2 weeks later, climatologically speaking, we've seen snow before. So I obviously can tell you there's a lot that can change from year to year when it comes down to temperature. But 90-degree days are still a possibility around this time of year and can at least be a possibility we know to this day, October 13th. It's the latest we've seen it here in Charlotte of 90-degree days. And we are actually seeing summer heat linger. Latest research data from the Climate Central shows that from 1970 to 2024, our summer heat has gotten longer in Charlotte by about 11 days. So that's about almost a week and a half there of temperatures above 85 degrees or so, looking at the last 50 years here. So lingering summer heat, basically this chart is looking at the last day above 85 degrees since 1970. And if you look at it from 1970, they're looking at the left of the chart, you can see our last day above 85 degrees was happening around mid to late September. But when you look at it from about, I'd say 2000 to 2024, so about halfway through and to the end of this, to the far right, we're seeing these 85-degree days linger to more mid to late October, meaning that our last 85-degree days have went from a early to mid-September type ending to more of a mid to late October type ending. So that means our summer days are getting longer, summer seasons are getting longer. I do like the way Climate Central is kind of play this out with this graphic here, saying the seasons are shifting. Summer is getting longer and winters are shrinking, especially here in Charlotte. Obviously, we went almost 3 years without snow here. Now, there's all kinds of different weather patterns that go into the reason for that, but one big reason for that is we have had warmer winters here recently. So, yeah, our summers are getting longer and our winters are getting shorter when you look at the climate stats. So that's something that, we definitely need to correct, and that starts with less carbon emissions. It starts with taking care of our earth. In many ways, I always tell people to do this is by just starting the conversation with your neighbors and trying to figure out a way to do this. It could be as simple as growing a garden. It could be as simple as recycling more, or it could be as dramatic as getting an EV car, or even as dramatic as putting solar panels on your house. And I don't mean dramatic in the way of saying, oh, that's dramatic that person's doing that, but that's a pretty big change in your life to make. You always want to start small and then maybe grow yourself into more of those bigger changes for climate. So we talked about the summers getting longer. We talked about how we can have 90 degrees later in the season. It looks like this summer, we could possibly have 90-degree days in our future. But why is this important? What does this impact? On the other side of the break here on Pinpoint Weather University, I'll talk about what the impact of longer summers has and what that could do to our fall seasons. All coming up here next, here on Pinpoint Weather University. We'll be right back. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. It's been a pretty active show. We've talked about the tropics and how they will likely heat back up here now we've passed the peak of hurricane season. We've discussed our summers getting longer in regards to heat lingering more towards the fall months. And now I want to discuss why that is important, why these later summers are causing some issues for our fall seasons. But first, I do want to show you just a reminder. We're looking at potentially some warmer temperatures for late September. So this is looking at the temperature outlook for late September. And it's not just us here in the Carolinas. It's also across much of the U.S., the Midwest, the Rockies, the West Coast, the Deep South, the Southeast, the Northeast. Everybody has a chance to see above normal temperatures as we close out the month of September. When we should be cooling down, we're unfortunately going to be having warmer weather. Now, why is this important? So, when you look at the research and the data on this, the impacts of warmer falls are extreme in some levels. So, we've got more heat-related illnesses that happen because when you have hotter weather or more muggy conditions lingering for a longer period of time, this can cause more heat-related illnesses. Think about it when you get football players back on the field and it's a month and a half in the season and we still have football players cramping up because of how hot it is outside in some areas, especially down in the southeast, the deep south, and parts that get a lot of moisture from the Gulf where you have more muggier conditions. So more heat-related illnesses, that's a problem that we see during these warmer fall seasons. We get prolonged wildfire seasons. Wildfire seasons are a thing here in the Carolinas. We definitely saw it last year in the mountains with a lot of dead debris down, a lot of dead leaf debris from Helene and dead vegetation. That obviously ramped up wildfire season a little more last year. But whenever you have warmer air lingering longer, that can cause the wildfire season to last a little bit longer as well. Not just here in the Carolinas, but out west and as you're getting a little bit further north, West Virginia, I think about that as a key spot too that has been dealing with some longer wildfire seasons due to the warmer conditions lingering longer. And then allergy season, when things are still growing, we still have pollen that we're dealing with. So that's more sniffling and sneezing in the fall season. You have more ragweed pollen lingering into the fall months. So allergy season, another thing, and then you can get less beautiful colors. We need those cool, crisp mornings to really get the fall color to change. And whenever you have these warm, really warm fall seasons, that can really mute some of the color. So you really need some cool mornings, even some kind of frosty mornings up in the mountains. That really gets the fall color going. So that is the impacts of a warmer fall. And I also want to look at that later freeze too, because whenever you have warmer conditions, and I'm not saying we have summer-like air in November, it can happen occasionally, but the thing is that these later freezes that we're seeing during the fall season, they have pests sticking around. I talked to a lot of gardeners last year. They had pests, flies, all kinds of different things just lingering on their crops. Not good for their crops, and it's just annoying too. You get fruit trees remaining active. You need trees to kind of go dormant for a little bit so they can recycle and just kind of redo the process again as we go into the spring season. It just kind of interrupts the growing seasons a bit when things stay alive for a long period of time, like vegetation and crops and different things like that. And then again, the longer allergy season, that's just a common point to mention just because obviously nobody likes to sneeze and sniffle. And when things are continuing to grow in the fall months and you think you're pollen free, you're still dealing with the sneezing and sniffling because the pollen season is lasting longer and things are growing more. So again, this is all stemming from new research data from Climate Central. I want to pull this up for you full screen here. Again, it's showing you that summer heat's lingering more into the fall months. So looking at Charlotte from 1970 to 2024, we are seeing on average about 11 more days of 85-degree temperatures or higher, which means that our fall seasons are starting later, and this means that our summers are getting longer, and that shrinks the other seasons. So again, that's why we're looking at this data here on this Pinpoint Weather University, looking back at some of the new research data coming out from Climate Central there. So how does the fall warming look like as a whole? In Charlotte, from 1970 to 2024, our fall season is warmed by about 2 degrees. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot. It doesn't seem like a lot, right? 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit of warming doesn't seem like much. If you warm something up 2 degrees, it doesn't seem like a big deal, like food or something like that. But I like the way Shel Winkley over at Climate Central describes this. He's been on the Pinpoint Weather University show with us a couple of times now, and I like the way he describes it. If your body temperature warms up 2 degrees, if you're 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, when our bodies like to be at that temperature, it's comfortable for us. When our body warms up 2 degrees more, when our body warms up to 100 degrees versus 98 degrees, that's a big deal. Our body does not like that. We start sweating, we start getting the chills. Our body does not start really feeling well when our body temperature warms by that much. That's the same way we have to think about it on Earth. When our Earth warms up by 2 degrees in any area, it's not going to feel well. And we're going to start seeing impacts of that. And those impacts could be more violent hurricanes. It could be more natural disasters like severe weather outbreaks, Even winter storms can be more robust during a warming Earth. And then also you think about the wildfires that we continue to see out west and how those have become more frequent, but also more violent. So that's just a way your Earth reacts to warming temperatures. It's the way our Earth reacts. And it's the same way with our bodies. Our bodies don't really feel well when we get warmer by a degree or two. So that's why I always want to point out, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't seem like a lot when you look at this chart, but it is a lot for our Earth, and it'd be a lot for our bodies if our bodies warmed up by that much as well. So hopefully you enjoyed the episode today. This was a pretty jam-packed episode of Pinpoint Weather University. Again, it was great having Dr. Matthew Easton on from UNC Charlotte, associate professor there at UNC Charlotte. The main takeaways from his conversation that we had is that the peak of hurricane season's here. It's when we tend to have the warmest water, tend to have the less wind shear, and we also tend to have a little less Saharan dust. But another point that Dr. Easton mentioned is that we're likely going to see hurricane season pick back up again soon, and we can't let our guard down. Not saying we're going to see storms here in the U.S., but we still want to make sure we're prepared for that. And then also, hopefully you got a good message taken away from our fall seasons getting a little bit shorter because our summers are lingering more into the early fall months. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus with this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. As always, take care of yourself, take care of each other as we navigate our Earth together. Take care, folks.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.